Sí, buenas tardes. Os ruego que apaguéis los micrófonos, por favor, las cámaras, para que no se
Hola,
produzca.
Martín, ¿qué tal?
Hola, hola, Aparajit.
Nuestro topada, sí.
Buenas tardes. Bueno, por favor, si podéis apagar los micrófonos. Bueno, buenas tardes a todos. Bienvenidos a esta nueva actividad en línea del Instituto Cervantes de Nueva Delhi. Es un placer estar hoy aquí con todos vosotros para presentar la traducción al maratí de la novela de Roberto, Siete, locos. La traducción que ha realizado el hispanista Akshay Kale, profesor de la Universidad Jindal, con la colaboración de traductor Milindt Sant, y que ha sido publicada en la editorial Lokvangmaya Griha. Ambos nos acompañan aquí hoy. Buenas tardes, Akshay, Milindt. Muchas gracias por estar hoy aquí. Thank you very much, both. He de decir hoy que la satisfacción es doble porque esta presentación ha sido cancelada 2 veces ya, a causa de la pandemia. Primero en marzo de 2020, en que, bueno, tenía que ser presencial, teníamos que hacer una presentación en el instituto, y luego en abril de 2021, que fue justo en plena segunda ola de la pandemia. Pero bueno, como suele decirse, a la tercera va vencida. Hoy también contamos con la presencia de nuestros amigos de la Embajada de Argentina en India y del Consulado de Argentina en Mumbai, Belén García Alcat y Alejandro Underi, respectivamente, sin los cuales este acto no habría podido celebrarse. De ellos, de hecho, nació la idea tanto de la presentación del libro como de la proyección en línea de la adaptación de la obra de Al, a cargo de Leopoldo Torre Nilsson, que pudo verse ayer y a lo largo del día de hoy en Canal Vimeo. Buenas tardes, Belén y Alejandro. Muchas gracias por acompañarnos hoy. Es siempre un honor para el Instituto Cervantes contar con la colaboración, el apoyo de la Embajada Argentina. Hemos sido siempre socios, hemos colaborado siempre y así será en el futuro, espero. Quiero invitaros a los dos, antes de empezar a hablar del libro y de Roberto Al, a dirigir unas palabras a nuestro público. Será un placer escucharos. Y así que cuando queráis, Belén o Alejandro, adelante.
Bueno, primero, Martí, muchísimas gracias a vos y al Instituto Cervantes por la labor que hacen en la promoción del español, también a Akshay, a Milindt y a la editorial por la iniciativa de traducir al maratí esta obra tan importante de la literatura argentina. Y solamente quisiera decir que en este evento se mezclan la literatura y el cine para entender un poco más la cultura. En cuanto a la literatura, al libro Los Siete Locos, sobre eso va a hablar mucho Akshay y también va a hablar Milindt. Así que quisiera solamente decir algo con relación a la película, Los Siete Locos de Torre Nilsson, cuya nieta, Sofía, nos autorizó a poder proyectar esta película. Y le pregunté a Sofía si su abuelo estuviera acá, ¿qué nos querría decir para el público que puede ver esta película? Y me dijo esto, una reflexión de su abuelo cuando le preguntaba qué buscaba con su cine. Como sé que muchos están estudiando español, la voy a poner en el chat, así la tienen por escrito.
Belén, creo que hay un problema con el sonido.
Ops, perdón. Les digo de vuelta la frase de Torre Nilsson que su nieta quería poner, que compartiera con ustedes. Quiero hacer un cine que tenga patria, sí, esto, un cine que ande parásito entre las afligentes tinieblas de un mundo en descomposición, intuyendo, ganando pequeñas y tremendas batallas para el espíritu, gritándonos que el hombre todavía no ha sido derrotado por el hombre, ajeno a superficiales modismos de presuntas minorías, vital y sangrante, vivo y necesario, ni cine teatro, ni cine pintura, ni de vanguardia ni de masas. Un cine cálido y auténtico, producto de mi soledad, mi oficio y mi tristeza. Así que bueno, espero que disfruten tanto de la película como del libro. Gracias.
Muchas gracias, Belén. No sé si Alejandro quería dirigirnos también unas palabras.
Sí, muchas gracias, Martí. Buenas noches a todos y gracias por acompañarnos hoy aquí en este lanzamiento de Los Siete Locos de Roberto. Particularmente no me voy a referir a la obra en sí, ya que hoy estamos acompañados por expertos en literatura cuya opinión al respecto es mucho más pertinente que la mía. Pero sí quiero agradecer especialmente al profesor Kale y a su equipo por este monumental trabajo de traducción, ya que, como sabemos, traducir no es solo un simple trabajo mecánico, sino que es necesaria una verdadera tarea de interpretación de lo que el autor quiso decir en su lengua original para poder reescribirlo en otra lengua. Y digo monumental trabajo del profesor, ya que él debió traducir partiendo no desde un español neutro, como sabemos, sino que debió partir del español en su variante rioplatense o argentina, una variante que tengo el gusto de hablar, que es particularmente difícil para otros hablantes del español, y que está dentro de la amplia gama de matices que ofrece en nuestro querido idioma. Por eso quiero remarcar, destacar y agradecer especialmente la tarea del profesor Kale, que yo veo como un aporte muy valioso para dar a conocer la cultura hispánica y argentina particularmente en la India. Por último, para no extenderme mucho, si se me permite, no quiero dejar de referirme al programa Sur de la Cancillería Argentina. Este programa, creado con el fin de promover el conocimiento de los autores argentinos, ya sea clásicos o contemporáneos, y de distintos géneros literarios, es un programa que ya lleva más de 12 años y gracias al cual el profesor Kale y su equipo recibió el apoyo necesario para impulsar este proyecto que hoy vemos ya finalizado y terminado. Por ejemplo, con este programa, y gracias al esfuerzo conjunto de la Embajada y del Consulado que aquí hoy represento, hemos logrado que tradujeran en los últimos años distintas obras, como el poema nacional argentino, La Vuelta de Martín Fierro, al bengalí, o la obra de Borges, Ficciones, al hindi. Así que nada más, esperamos desde el Consulado en Mumbai, y creo hablar también en nombre de la Embajada, que este evento sea solo el comienzo, o las primeras páginas de un largo trabajo de colaboración y cooperación que permitan difundir la cultura hispánica en la India. Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Alejandro. Muchas gracias, Belén. Hoy también tenía que estar aquí con nosotros el editor del libro, Rajan Bhavdekar, de la editorial Lokvangmaya Griha, pero le ha surgido un imprevisto, así que nos ha mandado un vídeo que vamos a reproducir a continuación.
Good evening. I feel honored to be a part of this online event, and I also thank all the organizers, especially Argentinian Consulate, New Delhi, on behalf of Lokvangmaya Griha Publishing House. Lokvangmaya Griha is a leading Marathi publishing house, and it is affiliated to PPA, that is People's Publishing House, New Delhi. Our parent organization is formed during India's freedom struggle in early 40s with the aim to publish, bring out various forms of literature, suppress literature, and intentionally ignored literature to a people of this subcontinent. After the independence, People's Publishing House has shifted its headquarters in New Delhi, and thereafter they have promoted or rather encouraged various Indian languages and formed independent publishing houses such as Malayalam, Tamil, Kannada, Telugu. So in Marathi, Lokvangmaya Griha publishing house is a leading name and force to reckon with, a name to reckon with in Marathi literary field. Our publication has bagged many prestigious awards such as Sahitya Akademi, State Government Awards, etc., etc. Lokvangmaya is normally publishing a reference books which is all the time relevant for any researcher, a studied person, students, professor, in teaching profession, like that. So, this is the book we published in our last literary conference held in January 2020 at Usmanabad.
Muy bien, estupendo. Bien, yo creo que ahora, bueno, antes que nada, Akshay, si puedes transmitir al señor Pavdekar nuestro agradecimiento. Bien, bueno, yo creo que ahora podemos empezar, digamos, con la presentación propiamente dicha. Vamos a proceder de la siguiente manera. Primero, Akshay Kale nos expondrá, nos explicará quién fue Roberto y lo que significa dentro de la tradición literaria argentina. Y a continuación, él y Milindt Sant pues nos leerán algunos fragmentos de la obra en el original español y en la traducción maratí. Y para finalizar, como hacemos habitualmente, todos los participantes podréis hacer comentarios o preguntas a nuestros invitados. Así que muchas gracias a todos, a la Embajada Argentina, a Akshay y Milindt, a la editorial y al público que está hoy aquí. Y así, Akshay, te cedo la palabra cuando quieras.
Muchas gracias, Martí. Y bueno, en primer lugar, quisiera agradecer tanto a Martí del Instituto Cervantes como a Oscar Puyo, del director, que no está hoy con nosotros, pero seguro siempre ha sido una fuente de enorme apoyo para nosotros. También muchas gracias al consulado de Argentina de Mumbai, al cónsul Alejandro Underi, que siempre ha promovido esos esfuerzos de traducción, y a la señora Belén García Alcat por compartir sobre todo este mensaje tan bonito, ¿no? de la nieta del director de la película, lo cual ha sido una sorpresa para mí porque realmente no pensaba que iba a haber una participación así, bueno, una contribución, una intervención así. Así que bueno, muchas gracias a todos ustedes por haber hecho posible esta presentación. I will present in English as well as Spanish because I think there are a lot of students as well as a lot of interested persons who might be more comfortable in English. So I will, as we have mentioned in the flyer itself, the presentation will be carried out in a mix of English as well as Spanish. So I have prepared a presentation and it has quotes in Spanish mostly. I will go on explaining in English as need be. So if anyone has any doubts, as Marti has said, that we are going to have a question answer session, so you are all free to address your queries later on, if need be, right? So let's talk about Los Siete Locos and Roberto Alt. So one of the things which really, I think, which Mr. Bowdekar really hit the nail on the head was when he talked about the promotion of intentionally ignored literature and suppressed literature. So in that context, I think it's especially relevant to point out that although Roberto Alt is now celebrated as a canonical figure, he was largely ignored in his lifetime. He did not make it big as a novelist in his lifetime. So here he was born Roberto Godofredo Alt. He had a Polish name, right? And born to Polish immigrants. And so this immigrant identity always marked him, right? So his entire name, his complete name was Roberto Godofredo Christophersen Alt, which is not a very typically Argentine, typically Spanish name. So Roberto Alt bursts onto the literary scene at a time when the entire world is in a state of flux and is in a state of volatility. He was born in 1900. So he's a contemporary of Borges, because Borges was born in 1899. Jorge Luis Borges, as you all might know, is the name which you would most associate with Argentine letters and Argentine literature. So Alt was a contemporary of Borges, in fact. And we're going to see that later. We're going to see what Borges opined about his literature as well. But essentially, Roberto Alt was a self-taught writer. He was a self-taught writer, and he had a very difficult childhood. He ran away from school when he ran away from home when he was 16. There are also funny stories of him writing an effusively emotional note to a school teacher of his when he was 8. And he was also sent home due to this emotional effusiveness towards his teacher. Apart from that, the most important thing which marked him was leaving home at the age of 16. Imagine we're talking 1916, and Argentina is witnessing a lot of economic prosperity and economic activity, and there's an influx of immigrants, mostly from Europe, from Spain, as well as from Spain, Italy mostly, but also from Poland and other countries. So you have this, the Buenos Aires transforming in a couple of years into una ciudad cosmopolitan, or in a cosmopolitan city, and this had its discontents, obviously, right? The discontents of modernity, which it could be signaled or represented as the discontents of modernity. So there was a lot of turmoil, and from that turmoil, the literature which came out, the turmoil, the literature which was fruit of that turmoil was the literature of Roberto Alt, one of the leading figures of that, of representing that literary current in Argentine literature. So we have to accordingly contextualize his importance in the in Argentine literature. So we are talking about this novel, Los Siete Locos, which he himself considered his best novel. He wrote only 4 novels. The first novel was El Juguete Rabioso, which would be something like the Enchanted Toy. Then came Los Siete Locos, the 7 Madmen. Los Lanzallamas, the Flamethrowers, which is a continuation of the Siete Locos. And then the last novel which he wrote was El Amor Brujo. No, so these novels weren't instantly impactful, right? So they did. Los Siete Locos, for example, was quite successful, but obviously it wasn't that well received. And Alt stopped writing novels after the last novel, after El Amor Brujo, and he died prematurely at the age of 42 from a heart attack, from another urban ill, as you could say, no? Murió de otro mal urbano, as many critics have said, no? That he died from a heart attack at the age of 42. At that time, he was completely devoted to the task of writing plays. He had switched to theater and had given up his novelistic pursuits. Another factor another facet of his personality which we have to talk about is his obsession for chemical formulae, his obsession as an inventor. So much like Erdosain, the main character of Los Siete Locos, Roberto Alt was also obsessed with inventions, and he wanted to get rich quick with some invention, which was obviously doomed to fail. But even in his notebooks and his notes, we see these like detailed descriptions of chemical formulae and his obsession with inventing something, his obsession with mechanics, which is his obsession with chemistry, etc. So that is another interesting aspect of his personality, which has to be really underlined, and which is evident in the book itself, which is reflected in his book itself. So let me begin with what Alt himself says about his novel, about his Siete Locos, about his 7 madmen. So obviously, I think the title itself suggests that this book is about the marginalized. This book is about the people who are on the fringes of society. And Alt makes it very clear in an interview when he said that estos individuos, I'm going to read in Spanish and later summarize in English, estos individuos canallas y tristes, viles y soñadores, atados o ligados entre sí por la desesperación. La desesperación en ellos está originada más que por la pobreza material, por otro factor, la desorientación, que después de la Gran Guerra ha revolucionado la conciencia de los hombres, dejándolos vacíos de ideales y esperanzas. Hombres y mujeres en la novela rechazan el presente y la civilización. Quisieran creer en algo, arrodillarse ante algo, amar algo. Aunque quieran creer, no pueden. Como se ve, la angustia de estos hombres nace de su esterilidad interior. So, he's saying that these individuals who are scoundrels, who are sad, who are vile, and who are dreamy, they are linked amongst themselves by utter desperation. And the desperation is not provoked by, is not the fruit or is not the product of some material deprivation. Rather, is a disorientation which has taken hold of society after the First World War. It's talking the First World War here, the La Gran Guerra. And interestingly, Los Siete Locos is published in the year 1929. So I am very sure that our audience knows the significance of that, of the year 1929 vis-a-vis the world economy. It is the year of the Great Collapse, the Great Depression, right? And so we have these men and women who are in a state of utter desolation and utter disorientation. It's just, there is a void in society, a spiritual void, which is gnawing at their interior, right? And that's what Alt says when he says that the anguish of these men and these women stems from their inner sterility. So the inner sterility is something which is hopelessly, which renders one hopeless, and which is the root cause of the misery of these 7 madmen, who then turn to a fantastic conspiracy to topple the capitalist state, to topple the government, to topple the establishment, and are led by a pedagogue, he's also a pedagogue, you could say, but mainly they are led by a demagogical figure, by a demagogue, which is the figure of the astrologer, which we're going to talk about later. Right. So in the novel, we see Alt's obsessions. There are resonances of Kafka and Dostoevsky, above all in the relationship with the father, right? So Erdosain, who is the protagonist of the film, the film as well. The novel starts with Erdosain being caught in a petty act of embezzlement by his company, and then he is threatened with arrest if he doesn't return the money. and then he goes home and his wife has left him. He goes home to find his wife with another man, and so it's just a heap of humiliation bunched up, one humiliation bunched upon another, a heap of humiliating instances which he has to go through, humiliating processes which he has to face. And in that we see los ecos kafkianos y dostoevskianos, la relación con el padre, the relationship with the father. So Erdogan, in his utter humiliation, imagine what has just happened to him, right? In the novel, he's reeling from the onslaught of one misery after another, and then he recalls his father used to humiliate him. His father used to humiliate him by deferring the punishment, and this deferred punishment was something which he used to gnaw at his insides, which used to really wear him down. So you can see what sort of character development is as Alt is going for. Again, this has a clear link with his relationship with his own father. As I told you, he left home at the age of 16 and then worked in a number of jobs as an apprentice in workshops, and he had to earn his living any which way he could. He had to do whatever he could and earn and eke out a living. So therein we see the influence of Kafka and also Dostoevsky. And Alt himself has professed his immense admiration for Dostoevsky, and la angustia como la condición principal de los personajes, como lo que les aflige, lo que les mueve a emprender tareas estrafalarias, ¿no? Por así decirlo. This anguish which drives them towards utter madness, towards the sheer insanity of thinking that they can restructure society, right? And not restructure society in the way the utopian socialists went about it. So here we're talking about someone like Erdogan, who is actually preparing bombs, who has knowledge of bombs and all, of how to put together bombs in order to topple the state machinery. So we have this anguish, this persistent anguish, as the principal characteristic of these personalities, of these siete locos, of these personajes, of these characters, and this is best evidenced in what we have in I'm going to play a clip of the film, right? And here we can see this anguish, which also is shaped by their peculiar relationship with money. So here I've inserted a quotation by celebrated Argentine author Ricardo Piglia, who's largely credited for having resurrected the figure of Alt in Argentine letters. Poderoso caballero, don dinero. Poderoso caballero es don dinero. So for those who don't know Spanish, don dinero, Mr. Money, is a powerful gentleman. I'm just going to read out the quote. Para los personajes de Alt no se trata de ganar dinero, sino también de hacerlo. Esta tarea, asociada con la falsificación y la estafa, se afirma en la ilusión de transformar la miseria en dinero. En Los Siete Locos, Erdogan trabaja de un modo casi religioso para crear dinero de la nada. Sus inventos son una forma sublimada, alquímica, del beneficio capitalista. Para Erdogan, inventar es una operación demiúrgica, destinada a encontrar la piedra filosofal moderna, el oro que no lo es, la rosa de cobre. Right? So, for Alt's characters, it's about earning. It's not about earning money. It's about how to do it and earn money, not just to cover your basic necessities. It's earning money is the passport, is the gateway to social acceptance and social belonging. But even then, even in that effort itself of earning money is in itself doomed, because we all know that this incessant drive towards material prosperity is always going to leave them with a spiritual vacuum. Because let's face it, in a capitalist society, in a society which is highly which is characterized by hierarchy, in a highly hierarchized society, it is very difficult to beat the powers that be, to beat the haves, the ones who have, but the ones who are born with property, with the ones who are born with privileges. It's very difficult to supersede them. So in that case, here, La Rosa de Copper, the Copper Rose, is especially important because in the film and in the novel, Erdogan is obsessed. In the novel, Erdogan is obsessed with the creation of a copper rose, which he believes would be to be the panacea to all his problems. So he's obsessed with the invention of with this bizarre invention, which he thinks holds the key to sublime happiness. So, as Piglia says, for Erdogan, to invent is a demiurgical operation. It's almost as if he's out to find the sorcerer's stone, the philosopher's stone, and the panacea to all the ills afflicting society. So here I have put, obviously we have Alt and we have Quevedo. So you can see that Alt, although he claims, as we will see later on, that Alt wasn't really, he was self-taught. He wasn't really a man of letters as Borges was, or as Ricardo Guiraldes, another contemporary of his whom he admired tremendously. He was not a man of letters, but even then we can see his grounding, his grounding in what moves people, in his grounding in literature vis-a-vis what would move the people, what would reach out to the masses. And it's no wonder that he was a journalist as well. This is directly linked with his labor, his distinguished labor as a journalist till the end of his life, where he had two columns in leading newspapers where he had a column in the leading newspapers of the day called Aguafuertes Porteñas, which was like etchings of Buenos Aires, as well as Aguafuertes Españoles, where he wrote about the situation in Spain. He wrote about the marginalized people and the marginalized communities in Spain as well, when he was sent to Spain as an external correspondent. Right.
Baja nota y otra.
So here I am just going to play a clip and I'll go on commenting the clip accordingly.
Baja nota y otra en un palacete residencial.
¿Usted me puede prestar 600 pesos?
Cálmese, ¿qué es lo que le pasa?
Si no repongo mañana 600 pesos en la azucarera, me meten preso.
¿Y cómo robó ese dinero?
Falta de control en la empresa. Fíjese, el cobrador no llevaba cuenta de los vales que yo decía no haber cobrado. Pero un anónimo me reventó. Usted tiene que ayudarme.
¿Encontraba alguna satisfacción al robar?
No, ninguna.
Entonces, ¿por qué anda con los botines rotos?
Ganaba muy poco.
¿Y lo que robaba?
Nunca pensé que con plata robada se pudieran comprar zapatos.
So the subtitles are good, but I'll just translate literally. So what he's saying literally is that I never thought that you could buy small things such as shoes with stolen money. So you can see the utter futility of stealing by someone who has actually stole money, right? So this gives you an idea of the anguish which has gripped Erdogan. This is Erdogan in the film. This is the lead character, and the other two are also the part of the Siete Locos. We have the astrologer, who is the leader of the secret society, and we have the El Rufián Melancólico Hafner, who is to be in charge of the prostitution in the proposed secret society. Because according to the astrologer, the prostitution is going to be the brothels are going to be the fundamental economic support of this proposed new utopic society.
Más de 200 pesos se los di a una familia amiga, los Espila, para instalar un pequeño laboratorio. Y el resto, no sé, lo gasté en cualquier cosa.
Entonces, ¿lo meterán preso?
Claro.
Usted sabe que solo cuento con 1000 pesos, que son la base de todos mis proyectos. Yo solo puedo darle 300 pesos. También usted las cosas que hace, mi amigo, ¿eh?
Es que la angustia, ¿sabe?
¿Cómo es eso que está diciendo?
Digo que es la angustia. Uno roba, hace macanas, porque está angustiado. Bueno, pero yo no vine a dar explicaciones. Yo con 300 pesos no hago nada. Yo no necesito plata, no palabras. Si usted no me lo puede dar, dígame y buscaré en otro lado. Buenas noches.
Siéntese, amigo. Yo le voy a dar los 600 pesos. Para eso estamos los hombres. Hagamos esto. Yo le doy los 300 pesos. Y usted le da el resto. No. Usted necesita la plata, yo no. Baja nota y otra en un palacete residencial.
Later, we cut to Erdogan coming to find his wife with another man, with his wife Elsa, who is about to leave with her lover, another man, and we see one of the most moving dialogues of the novel as well as the film. I think this is one of the few I have selected these scenes. I think these are the ones which the filmmaker really has made justice to what Alt had in mind.
¿Por qué estoy? ¡Ustedes no se acuestan!
Señor Erdogan, nosotros nos retiramos.
¿Sabe por qué no lo mato como un perro? Porque estoy frío.
Bueno, Remo, me voy. Era necesario que todo esto terminara así.
¿Te vas?
Quédate tranquilo, te pido. Ya te dejé la ropa arreglada. Cámbiate el cuello. Siempre la haces pasar vergüenza a una.
Y todos nuestros proyectos. Mis inventos.
¿Qué quieres que haga?
Again, the obsession with the
Baja nota y otra en un palacete residencial.
obsession with the inventions, right? So Erdogan has driven his wife to the brink as well. There is obsession for the inventions which never fructified, which never brought the promised prosperity.
No trabajaste.
Me quisiste alguna vez.
Siempre te quise.
Bueno, ya sabes, cuando quieras podés venir. Pero decime la verdad. ¿Me quisiste alguna vez?
Siempre te quise. Ahora también te quiero.
So we see, I think this is one of the best exemplifications of the crippling anguish which characterizes Erdogan, which I think the actor Mr. Alcone has done a great job here as well. The lead actor has done a great job in portraying this hopeless turmoil, which just catapults Erdogan, the lead, the protagonist, from one misery to another. Right, and talking about this enervating atmosphere, this sort of this, I would say, this atmosphere which hems you in. Here, you would trace a direct link with Baudelaire, whom Alt himself called anointed as his spiritual father. And in fact, in his first novel, El Juguete Rabioso, there's a scene of the library burning, and the only book of literature which is rescued is a book of poems by Baudelaire. So that was the importance which Baudelaire had for Alt. And then we see that how the narrative of Alt is a part of this tradition of urban literature, right? La narrativa de Roberto Alt se inscribe dentro de la tradición de la literatura urbana tradición que se conecta a un momento de la transformación capitalista, el pasaje de la ciudad aldea a la ciudad mundo, ¿no? Naturalmente, Buenos Aires es el hábitat que contiene la totalidad de los conflictos y situaciones que atraviesan sus relatos. Y en esta adhesión absorbente habremos de ver la gravitación de la gran ciudad, centro polar económico del país, a la vez que obligado punto de conexión y representación de la Argentina interior con el mundo de afuera. So, right, like Baudelaire, there is this figure of the flaneur of gambling through the city, but in the case of Erdogan, this gamble through the city, this act of the flaneur, isn't an act of, no es un acto de, o no es una acción llena de reflexiones o de contemplación. It's just a hurtling from one place to another in the city, right? With Temperley being one of the railway junction of Temperley being one of the focal points of this hurtling, this incessant rodar, as you would say in Spanish, rodar incesante, this incessant lurching towards doom. And in this case, doom is epitomized by Temperley, where the astrologer has his mansion where he plans all the activity of the secret society. So you have an image of Buenos Aires which is completely like the ciudad canalla, la ciudad que oprime, no? It's a city which hems you in, which beats the protagonist down, which really plays a huge role in the disintegration of Erdogan and other characters as well. So this is completely removed from the idealistic representation of the Pampa, of rural Argentina, of an aristocratic class which is trying to forge a past for itself. Whereas there was this class of immigrant writers like Roberto Arlt who were trying to forge a future in any way possible. So the narrative of Arlt, his entire literary oeuvre, militates against the tradition, against this tradition of glorification of the rural countryside, of the Pampa, and of Argentina as this promised land of with large pastures, with huge tracts of land waiting to be capitalized upon. So what do we have in a sense? We have these immigrants huddled around the port city, around the city of Buenos Aires, and their abject conditions and their way of life, which is their way of life which gets worse by the day, which is threatened, their foot to mouth existence, which leads them into all sorts of delinquency. So now let me talk a little bit about the style, the literary style of Roberto Arlt. And I think as a translator, this acquires a special dimension. Como traductor creo que es un gran reto traducir a un escritor tan bien versado en diferentes estilos lingüísticos, sobre todo por el uso del lunfardo y otros dialectos propios de Buenos Aires. De Arlt se ha dicho, bueno, esta cita se le atribuye a Borges. So this quote is attributed to the great Jorge Luis Borges, whom I mentioned earlier. Apparently, Borges said that he was a great writer who wrote badly, and he was referring to his syntactic lapses and his spelling mistakes and all, and typographical errors, etc., etc. I don't really think that's true. I think Arlt is a master of his craft, and the way he changes registers and his and the control and the utter control and the utter dominion that he exerts over his literary style is astounding. I think it was not appreciated enough in his heyday, but I think now with the passage of time we can safely say that Arlt was one of the greatest Argentine writers of the 21st century, and I would say of all times. So Arlt was also used to be sarcastic when people used to pass comments like these. Sometimes he used to be modest and humble, but then there were times when his biting sarcasm took over, and then he used to say things like, "The future is ours, el futuro es nuestro por prepotencia de trabajo. Crearemos nuestra literatura no conversando continuamente de literatura, sino escribiendo en orgullosa soledad libros que encierran la violencia de un cross a la mandíbula. Future is ours." by dint of hard work, right? We'll create our own literature, and we won't be talking about it continuously, but we will be writing in our proud solitude about books which will contain the violence, which will transmit the violence of a punch to the jaw, of a blow to the jaw. So this was the idea of literature, which Alt had this conception of literature as something which would rattle you, which would shake you to the core, which would not allow you to go on, be contented and be content with the status quo. This has a lot in common with Kafka's literature, as Theodor Adorno has rightly pointed out, that Kafka's literature was truly committed literature in a sense, because the reader was left with no other option but to think and to reflect, and there was no option of I would say a pliant quietude, una quietud placentera after reading Kafka. And I think similarly with Alt, once you have read Alt, you cannot just go back to what you're doing, or you just cannot accept things as they are, because then you're compelled to think. And while I was reading this novel, it took me a long time. I have no shame in admitting it took me a long time. It's a tough novel. It's anyway tough novel to translate, obviously, because of the linguistic challenges involved. But there is no ray of hope. It's like you are sucked into a vortex of abject misery, and you feel for Erdosine, you feel for the characters, and you are just rattled to the core. So here I would like to talk about another parallel. So is this novel hopeless? Is there no hope in this novel? Well, there are glimmers. There's a glimmer of hope, for example, in the relationship of Erdosine and Luciana, which in Los Siete Locos, Luciana makes just a brief appearance in a chapter, but there you see, and you will see it in the film as well if you watch the film, there is a glimmer, there's a glimpse of love, of true love, because Luciana is a woman whose brothers are also inventors. If you remember that Erdosine talks about Los Espila, the family whom he has given money to set up a laboratory. So Luciana supports him in his inventions, and Erdosine, I think she's one of the few people who really believe in him, genuinely believe in him. She studies metallurgy for him. So you see a glimpse of that short-lived spark of love. The same way we see it in Cien Años de Soledad, in the case of Petra Cotes and Aureliano II. But obviously in Cien Años de Soledad, as you all might know, this love story bears fruit. Literally, they have a lot of children. On the other hand, Erdosine and Luciana have no escape from the dire reality surrounding them, and on the dire reality which will prey upon them, and which will ensure that they are their utter humanity is deprived to them. So coming now to parallels with Indian literature, I think in his portrayal and his depiction of the marginalized, of people who are canallas, gente que son canalla, of people who are destitute and who are on the fringes of society, I think Roberto Alt has a lot in common with Namdev Dastan, one of the leading poets of Marathi literature, one of the leading figures of Marathi letters in above all, in particularly the 21st century. In the 20th century, he died in 2014. But even then, I think one of the names to be reckoned with as regards Marathi poetry. And in fact, if you see how his poetic work was translated into English, it's poet of the underworld. So in a way, Alt was also a writer of the underworld in his time, in his heyday. And this poem, this brilliant poem by Namdev Dasal, which is here that I have put the translation by Dilip Chitre. I think most of my friends who are familiar with Marathi literature would be familiar with this poem. I think summarizes a lot and reflects, echoes with Alt's concerns, echoes with Alt's conception of reality itself. So I'll just read out this poem. Man, you should explore yourself. To best to start with, jive to a savage drum beat. Man, you should keep handy a rampuri knife, a dagger, an axe, a sword, an iron rod, a hockey stick, a bamboo. You should carry acid bulbs and such things on you. You should be ready to carve out anybody's innards without batting an eyelid. Commit murders and kill the sleeping ones. Let all this grow into a tumor to fill the universe, balloon up and burst at a nameless time to shrink. Interestingly, the astrologer, as I mentioned, who is the mastermind of this conspiracy to overthrow the state, thinks of his secret society as a cancer, as a tumor which will grow and burst society from within. So here we have a direct a parallel with one of the leading voices in Marathi poetry. I would just like to end on a lighter note. So, La Casa de Papel, many of my students in Jindal University as well as in Cervantes would know that would know this famous Netflix series. So in Casa de Papel, again we have a mastermind who is weaving a conspiracy together. Obviously, the professor, la figura del profesor no se puede equiparar tal cual a la figura del astrólogo. It cannot be. There is no. Obviously, there are differences. There are shades of gray and black and white as well. But I would say that this whole premise of La Casa de Papel, of people on the fringes of society, of the madmen, so to say, of the destitute, of the underprivileged, of the dispossessed, of all these people scheming against the state, scheming to bring down the state, and being led by a mastermind who promises them nothing less than utopia in this rotten society, has a lot of influence of Roberto Alt. I'm not sure whether they would themselves accept it, but I think there is something, there is a clear influence to be detected there. So I enjoin you all to explore the literature of Roberto Alt. Los Siete Locos is available in translation as well as The Seven Madmen. Most of his novels are available in translation. I myself have translated, along with Milindt, I have translated this novel, his main novel, Los Siete Locos, into Marathi. I think there's a translation available in Hindi as well of Los Siete Locos. So you could, so if you want, you could try to explore in depth the seminal work of Roberto Alt, and I hope this presentation has been a good enough introduction for you to get interested and try and read one of the finest writers of Argentine letters. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Muy bien, muchas gracias, Akshay, por tu presentación. Ahora os invito a que veáis algunos fragmentos de la obra, tanto en la edición original como en la traducción, por supuesto. Adelante cuando queráis.
So I think I shall read out the Spanish first, right, Milindt?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. So I'll just. Right. So this is I have the versión de cátedra and page 208. Será la poda del árbol humano, una vendimia que solo ellos, los millonarios, con la ciencia a su servicio, podrán realizar. Los dioses, asqueados de la realidad, perdida toda ilusión en la ciencia como factor de felicidad, rodeados de esclavos tigres, provocarán cataclismos espantosos, distribuirán las pestes fulminantes. Durante algunos decenios, el trabajo de los superhombres y de sus servidores se concretará a destruir al hombre de mil formas, hasta agotar el mundo casi, y solo un pequeño resto, será aislado en algún islote sobre el que se asentarán las bases de una nueva sociedad. Basud se había puesto en pie, con el entrecejo fiero y las manos metidas en los bolsillos del pantalón. Se encogió de hombros, preguntando: ¿pero es posible que usted crea en la realidad de esos disparates? No, no son disparates, porque yo los cometería aunque fuera para divertirme. Y continuó: desdichados hay que creerán en ellos, y eso es suficiente. Pero he aquí mi idea. Esa sociedad se compondrá de dos castas, en las que habrá un intervalo, mejor dicho, una diferencia intelectual de 30 siglos. La mayoría vivirá mantenida escrupulosamente en la más absoluta ignorancia, circundada de milagros apócrifos y por lo tanto mucho más interesante que los milagros históricos. Y la minoría será la depositaria absoluta de la ciencia y del poder. De esta forma queda garantizada la felicidad de la mayoría, pues el hombre de esta casta tendrá relación con el mundo divino, en el cual hoy no cree. La minoría administrará los placeres y los milagros para el rebaño, y la edad de oro, edad en la que los ángeles merodeaban por los caminos del crepúsculo y los dioses se dejaron ver en los claros de luna, será un hecho.
Actually, shall I read the Marathi translation now?
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah, thanks.
Muchas gracias. Now let me read the Marathi translation of the same. तो पुढे बोलला, हो, अशी एक वेळ येईल जेव्हा सर्व प्रकारच्या सुखांना चटावलेली आणि ईश्वराची निंदा करण्याची क्षमता असलेली अश्रद्ध मानवजात इतकी भ्रमिष्ट होईल की वेड लागलेल्या कुत्र्यांचं दमन करावं लागतं तसं तिचं दमन करावं लागेल. तू काय बोलतोयस? जणू काही मानवी वृक्षाची छाटणी करण्यासारखं असेल. ज्या कोट्यधीशांच्या हाती विज्ञानाची नाडी असेल तेच अशा प्रकारची छाटणी करू शकतील. हा ईश्वर वास्तवाला कंटाळलेला असेल आणि विज्ञान हा सुखाचा स्रोत आहे यावर त्याचा विश्वास नसेल. हा ईश्वर त्याच्या वाघासारख्या गुलाम अनुयायांना सोबत घेऊन भयंकर उत्पात करेल. संकटांच्या प्लेगाला खुली सवलत देईल. पुढचे अनेक आठवडे अतिमानवी लोक आणि त्यांच्या अनुयायांचं एकच काम असेल आणि ते म्हणजे जवळपास संपूर्ण जग हस्त होईपर्यंत हजारो मार्गांनी मानवजातीचा संहार करणं. आणि काही अवशेष, फक्त काही अवशेष छोट्या छोट्या बेटांवर ठेवले जातील आणि तेच नवीन समाजाची पायाभरणी करायला हातभार लावतील. बारसूट उठून उभा राहिला. त्याने हात पॅन्टच्या खिशात घातले. भविष्यवेत्त्याकडे जळजळीत नजरेने बघितले. त्यानंतर खिशातले हात सोडून विचारलं, तू या सगळ्या निरर्थक गोष्टींवर खरंच विश्वास ठेवू शकतोस? नाही, हे निरर्थक नाही. मी स्वतःची करमणूक करायला समर्थ आहे. तो पुढे बोलू लागला, ते काही असो, मुख्य मुद्दा हा आहे की असे अनेक दुर्भागी लोक आहेत जे विश्वास ठेवतील. पण माझी कल्पना अशी आहे की या नवीन समाजात 2 स्तर असतील. त्यांच्यात अंतर असेल, किंवा नेमकं सांगायचं तर 30 शतकांची बौद्धिक पोकळी. त्यांच्यापैकी बहुसंख्य जणांना जाणीवपूर्वक संपूर्ण अज्ञानात ठेवलं जाईल. त्यांना भाकड चमत्कारांच्या कथा सांगितल्या जातील, कारण त्या ऐतिहासिक कथांपेक्षा जास्त सुरस असतात आणि मुठभर लोकांच्या हाती विज्ञानाची नाडी असेल, त्यांच्याकडे ताकद असेल आणि या पद्धतीनेच बहुसंख्य लोकांना सुखाची ग्वाही देता येईल. कारण या स्तरातील लोकांचा दैवी जगाशी संपर्क असेल जो आज नाही. हे मुठभर लोक कळपाच्या सुखाचे आणि चमत्कारांचे नियंत्रण करतील आणि सुवर्ण युगाचे सुद्धा, ज्या सुवर्ण युगात देवदूत 3 सांजेच्या वेळी भटकत आणि चंद्रप्रकाशात ईश्वराचे दर्शन होत असे. हे असं होईल. ही राक्षसी कल्पना आहे. असं कधीही होणार नाही. का नाही? हा, मला माहिती आहे की असं होणार नाही, पण हे शक्य आहे असं मानून आपण पुढे जात राहिलं पाहिजे. सगळं काही उलट पालट आहे आणि विज्ञान खड्ड्यात गेलं. ते विज्ञान, त्याचा उद्देश काय आहे माहितीये तुला? आणि तू तुझ्या वहीत बुद्धिमंतांची खिल्ली उडवलेली नाहीस. तू असं म्हटलेलंच आहेस की ते सगळ्या क्षणभंगूर गोष्टींवर भाळलेले होते. अच्छा, मला वाटतं मी लिहिलेल्या बकवास गोष्टींनी तू चांगलाच प्रभावित झालेला दिसतोस. अर्थातच. आणि तू सुद्धा विरोधाला विरोध करू नकोस. तू म्हणतोयस की जसं माझ्या समाजात सगळं काही निराशादायकरित्या उलट पालट आहे, तसंच ते आताच्या समाजात सुद्धा आहे, पण वेगळ्या अर्थाने. आपलं ज्ञान आणि आपली आधिभौतिक असत्य बाल्यावस्थेत आहेत, तर समाज विशाल आहे आणि माणूस, गरीब बिचारा यातना भोगणारा माणूस, त्याला या भयंकर असमानतेचा भार सोसावा लागतो. एका बाजूला त्याला सगळं माहीत असतं तर दुसऱ्या बाजूला काहीच नाही. माझ्या संघटनेत आधिभौतिक असत्य, आश्चर्यांच्या ऐश्वर्याशी जवळीक हा उद्देश असेल तर विज्ञान या साऱ्या गोष्टींचं प्रतिनिधित्व करते. ज्या गोष्टी आंतरिक सुखासाठी निरुपयोगी असतात त्या सत्ता गाजवण्यासाठी आपल्या हातातील साधने असतील. त्याबद्दल दुमत नसेल, त्यात काही अर्थ नाही. माणसाने जवळपास सर्व गोष्टींचा शोध लावलाय, पण त्याला शासन करण्यासाठी ख्रिस्त किंवा बुद्धाच्या तत्वांपेक्षा चांगली मार्गदर्शक तत्व सापडली नाही. पण मुठभर लोकांचा विचार करता शंका घेणं ही चैनीची गोष्ट असते. आपण बाकी सर्वांना तयार सुख देऊ आणि मानवजात या दैवी उष्ट्या खरकट्यावर ताव मारेल. So that was the Marathi translation of the same excerpt. I thank Instituto Cervantes Nueva Delhi, Embajada de Argentina, Lokvangmaya Griha, and also my friend Akshay for giving me an opportunity to give my inputs in this project and allowing me time to speak in today.
Thank you. Muchas gracias, Milindt.
Can I just present my views on the same?
Yes, just 1 second. We have some problem.
I would just like to quote.
I think it's sorted out.
Okay, yeah. So go ahead, please. Yes.
Okay. I would just like to quote Sundar Surukai's article in The Hindu dated 22nd November 2016. Politics has always had a close relationship with lies. Politics and truth apparently do not go well together. Harold Pinter, in his Nobel Prize in Literature lecture in 2005, spoke on art, truth, and politics and argued the majority of politicians, on the evidence available to us, are interested not in truth, but in power and in the maintenance of that power. To maintain that power, it is essential that people remain in ignorance, that they live in ignorance of the truth, even the truth of their own lives. What surrounds us, therefore, is a vast tapestry of lies upon which we feed. So what really is the problem between politics and truth today? Is truth really anathema to politics? Perhaps politics has nothing to do with truth. The main purpose of democratic politics seems to be only to convince others of something or the other. Politicians have to convince the citizens, but the citizens also have to be prepared and ready to be convinced of that position. Almost always, the obstacle to being convinced is not something called the truth, but only one's commitment to certain beliefs. And I would also like to quote Linda Woodhead. Charismatic worship and other factors help the spread of Christianity in Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Asia. Here, where traditional frameworks of life are left behind as individuals travel to the expanding cities to find work in the global capitalist economy, Christianity helps develop a sense of personal worth independent of traditional social rules and strengthens individuals' resources for success in the new global capitalist economy. In situations of often desperate poverty and inadequate healthcare, it offers tangible support and material aid. And when all else fails, it offers a miracle. Although this is a quote, now the question is about Argentina. However, in my opinion, this also applies to other parts of the world as well. Well, those were my views. I just thought immediately about these two quotations, which were also suitable in this context. So I just felt like quoting them. Thank you.
Thank you, Milindt. So now I think we can open the session to our audience. So if someone wants to ask anything, to make a comment, so please go ahead, open the mic and go ahead, please.
I think Mr. Chattopadhyay would like to say something. Yes, sir. Please. Professor Chattopadhyay, yeah. Yeah, please go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, perfectly. You're audible.
Okay. I'm going to say just two things. First, I'd like to congratulate Akshay for this wonderful expose on Roberto Alt, a very lesser known Argentine writer in the Indian context, I would say. And thanks again to Akshay for this explaining the art of writing of Roberto Alt, the style, and also, Roberto Alt's concern for the underworld as reflected in his literature, especially in this novel, Los Siete Locos. I would like to thank also Argentine government and Argentine embassy in Delhi and consulate in Bombay for helping Indian translators from time to time with Program Asur for financing these kind of projects like Ficciones of Borges and Akshay's book. Now my question is one question to Akshay. That is, Akshay, do you know that Julio Cortázar was a great admirer of Roberto Alt? And have you read anything about Julio Cortázar's comments on Alt's novels? Number one. Secondly, you mentioned that in one way it can be said that this novel and many other works of Alt's reflect the literature of underworld in the Argentine context in the beginning of the 20th century. I have just one curiosity. Maxim Gorky also wrote one play which is titled Men of the Underworld. And there also he describes this kind of people, whom you called canallas, viles, etc., etc. And can you just talk about these two things? Like first is Julio Cortázar's reaction to Alt's writings, and whether Alt did read Maxim Gorky before writing this.
Yeah. So I think his opinions. He had a very high opinion of Alt. I think there's an English translation where his comments are mentioned in the preface. So I haven't been able to access it till now. But I do know what, for example, I have been able to access what Roberto Bolaño, another great Chilean author, has said about Alt. So Roberto Bolaño thinks that, feels that Alt is really good, but he's not as exceptional as he's made out to be. So he is in disagreement with the assessment of Ricardo Piglia, for example, who talks about Alt's greatness. So Bolaño basically says that you have to reread Borges. That's the moral of the story. So for him, Argentine literature is Borges only. And Cortázar, he also a great admirer of Cortázar. But I think as regards the Alt, there has been a sort of recuperación de su imagen. Ha habido una recuperación de su imagen en el sentido de que, claro, en su momento no fue tan, digamos, tan aclamado, pero a partir de entonces, porque claro, estamos hablando de la división de la literatura argentina de aquel momento en dos campos. Los de Florida, el círculo de estudios de los escritores cultos de Florida, y los de Beodo, ¿no? La otra escuela, por así decirlo, ¿no? Había dos escuelas a grandes rasgos. Entonces, a Alt se le ha querido encasillar en una escuela, pero la verdad es que Alt era, por ejemplo, se llevaba muy bien con Ricardo Guraldes. Y de hecho, el título de la primera novela lo cambió de La vida a perra o algo así, o el primer título propuesto, lo cambió a El juguete rabioso por sugerencia de Ricardo Guraldes. Exacto. Entonces, bueno, tengo que investigar qué ha dicho Cortázar exactamente. Solo sé a grandes rasgos que tiene una opinión muy, digamos, positiva acerca de la obra de Alt. Y en el contexto de Gorky, más que Gorky, yo creo que Dostoevsky, la nota, Memorias del subsuelo, ¿no? Notes from the Underground. Yo creo que, bueno, puede ser que haya resonancias o ecos de la obra de Gorky, pero por lo que he leído yo, Las Memorias del Subsuelo, Notes from the Underground, ese libro jugó un papel descollante en la ideación, en la concepción literaria de Roberto Alt. Y claro, bueno, se nota, es muy palpable, ¿no? la influencia de Dostoevsky. Incluso en Erdosain, ¿no? Que nos trae como ecos de Raskolnikov. Y la misma angustia que sentí yo como lector, the same anguish, the same sort of breathless anguish I felt when I read Dostoevsky, when I read Kafka, the same anguish I felt when I read Los Siete Locos. It's a largely humorless novel, no hay risa. No hay risa, o sea, no hay risa. En la novela hay risa, hay sarcasmo, hay un sarcasmo punzante, pero esos momentos no son momentos de alivio. Esos momentos son como, lo hacen peor, ¿no? Por ejemplo, la abyecta desesperación de Erdosain cuando dice a su mujer, me quiere, cuando está a punto de dejarla, y dice, cuando está a punto de salir, le dice, me das un beso, y ella dice, no, cuando vuelva. Parece de radionovela, porque claro, Alt leía mucha radionovela, pero no es para nada gracioso, ¿verdad? Es un humor hiriente, ¿no?
Vale. Bueno, Akshay, muchísimas gracias.
A usted por la pregunta, muchas gracias.
Esta vez, muchísimas felicidades.
Muchas gracias por asistir, profesor Chattopadhyay.
Muy bien. Tenemos una pregunta en el chat de Deepika.
Sí, de la profesora. Claro, la profesora. Sí,
Ah.
de Jindal, de profesora también ella. Sí, sí.
Pregunta, what were some of the linguistic challenges that you faced while translating the novel?
Right. So, first of all, when I read the novel, I thought I had made a huge mistake, to be honest. I thought this was beyond me, beyond my ken. It is a very difficult novel to translate due to the particular specific references and the use of lunfardo and other dialects. So, for example, I would say for budding translators, first thing to do is get your hands on a very good. For budding, even I consider myself a budding translator. That's what I'm saying. I know I'm not speaking from any vantage point of expertise, but the most important thing is to get your hands on a good annotated version. So I have the version by Cathedra, and if you see, almost every page has notes on specific vocabulary and issues of vocabulary. So I think without this book, it would have been near impossible to translate. I had one more version from the Library of Instituto of Cervantes. So I compared and collated two versions. I had to seek the advice of natives.